Actor Gary Sinise's faith and loss, terror in Israel, and woke madness. I'm joined today by Cheryl Chumley from the Washington Times and also Jesse Jackson from ChurchLeaders. We're going to be diving into all of this and more. Cheryl actually just got back from Israel. She had an incredible 15 days there. We're going to talk about what she saw, what she experienced, and Jesse's going to break down this crazy story. And this one's wild. Skillet frontman Jon Cooper, he came under fire over his book. We're going to get into what all happened and why it matters. And I had a chance to sit down with Gary Sinise, all about his faith, but in particular about the loss of his son. His son Mac recently passed away after a long battle with cancer. We're going to get into all of that and plenty more. We're giving you a chance to get behind the scenes access to what it's like to be covering these stories. So every week, just in case you're wondering, this new format here on the show, we bring in journalists, we bring in commentators, TV hosts, and others who share the stories that they're covering, and we talk about them as a group. And so we've got representatives from all different outlets coming on the show every week. Again, today it's Cheryl Chumley and Jesse Jackson. And with no further ado, let's dive in. Jesse, we've got to launch right in here with your story. Now, the title of this story is that Skillet's Jon Cooper received death threats and pornographic images because of the name of his book. What in the world is going on here?
Right. So I first heard of this. I forget where it was posted, but I saw the article come across, and it was because he did a podcast with Abby Johnson and described the stuff that he was getting. So I reached out to Jon right away and, asked him to kind of elaborate on it. And that's kind of what I was able to share in the article a little bit. The crazy thing is, his book has been out for a little while. I think it released, last November, if I'm correct. But it wasn't about the content in the book. Jon was saying it was literally, he was getting these threats just from the title. So wimpy, weak, and woke. He was getting it just from the title, which was crazy. And he's like, it made no sense to me. Jon obviously brought it back to the fact of like, he's like, I can only pinpoint it to the fact that it's a demonic attack. So much so that I think he said he didn't mention what radio outlet or what publication, but they contacted him and said, listen, Jon, I want to let you guys know, usually we do not do this, but we are receiving very horrible images based on like sharing probably the title of his book, that it was upcoming, or maybe it was an article or something like that they were promoting. And we had to block them. And he goes, the person told Jon, we don't usually do that because we like to hear feedback. But we had to do this, and we are telling you because this is concerning. So he got death threats in the mail sent to him. His oldest daughter obviously got threats as well. He says it was just crazy. So
how does that, I can't, Cheryl, I don't know about you, but like hearing this, I can't imagine. And all of us have been around people who disagree with us. We've said things that people have disagreed with. We've covered things that people haven't liked. I can't imagine, though, not liking something and then reacting in this sort of way. It's just such a foreign concept. And I shouldn't be shocked anymore by these stories, but I am. Cheryl, what is your take? Because you say that you cover a lot of things and you have a lot of perspectives that can get people pretty riled up, I'm sure.
That's exactly what people who are weak and woke do. They don't bother to do their due diligence research so they can argue or persuade based on logic and facts. They just react based on some sort of emotion that is usually not even based on anything factual, right? This is the age of X, Twitter, where you get, just the one line to put out what something's about. And then people don't bother to dig deeper and get to the fact. They just react based on what they think in their minds that you're trying to put forward. And usually when it's something that's coming from a Christian or conservative perspective, it just drives them crazy and ratchets any sort of level of response to that of hate.
Yeah. Well, you guys are all right. We all cover, obviously, in this podcast is bringing together journalists, hosts, commentators, people who are covering things in the faith space. We all cover a lot of tough topics. Jesse, I want to hear from you first on this, and I think my perspective is that things are getting worse in terms of responses. But what would you say, when it comes to the secular side's reaction to even just basic coverage of stories like this or basic Christian truth that's being put out there? Do you think that those reactions have gotten harsher, more extreme, or not? What is your take on that?
I want to say that they've gotten harsher. I think a big play comes into it with our social media. So we have a larger uh, view or a portal into that world that maybe, for people to get their hate messages across, they had to do it. It took longer, right? You had to send it through the mail, or you had to go, in Jon's case, you would have to go to a concert, or a book signing that he was going to be at. Now you don't have to. Now it can be on many different platforms, and if you get removed from one, you can go to the next. You can quote unquote troll them, stalk them by social media. So I think both factors are into play. I think there is a major rise, but part of that too, that rise is the fact that when you see more people doing it, because of social media, the people that have that same hate jump on that wagon faster, if that makes sense. So that's kind of what I've seen. Or what I believe. It definitely in the stories. And what's crazy is too, I don't think, now granted, who knows who was sending. John didn't know who was sending these. It's not like he looked these people up. But you also see this in the space of, it's not just non-Christians or the secular world doing this. It's
Yeah.
also a group of, there are radical, crazy, if I could say that word, crazy Christians, or quote unquote calling themselves Christians, that really do the same thing back, to probably what we could say their own, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Well, and you also have people in the Christian realm who are saying they're Christians, but they don't really espouse a lot of traditional beliefs, and
Yeah.
they're out there, kind of pushing back on these things. Cheryl, I have had ebbs and flows, and I think it also depends too. I mean, Jon is in a position where, I mean, here he's the lead singer of Skillet. He's got this massive platform. He's doing music, and then he puts these books out. I think that's shocking to some people. So there's sort of another added element to it that makes people even more angry, that why is this musician saying these things, which I love what Jon has to say. I think he does a great job. But Cheryl, for you, what have you noticed in terms of just reactions to your work?
Oh, well, I experienced quite a bit of backlash, right? As you probably know, as you do too, I'm sure, Billy, right?
Hmm.
Because
Yeah.
whenever you meld that Christian viewpoint or that Christian worldview with politics, with government, as founding fathers did, by the way, then you're going to strike a nerve with a lot in America who want to see America go down the path of Europe, be completely secular, even to the point of atheism. And Democrats in particular, the Democrat Party of today, advocates openly for a separation of church and state, that they point to the Constitution as underscoring, but of course that doesn't exist in the Constitution. So what they really aim to achieve is a total atheist type of society where the government is the one that tells people what to do. The government is looked upon as the dear leader, and the government in the end becomes the god of worship of the people.
Yeah. Well, if, and I'll just say this final comment on this. If your goal is to take some sort of moral higher ground or push back on people, sending pornographic images and hateful things it's just so funny to me how people think that they're making some sort of legitimate point when actually they're just proving the point of what Jon is trying to say and others are trying to say. But it's bizarre. But I want to actually transition into your quote unquote story, Cheryl. And that story is that you were in Israel. You just recently got back. And I mean, it sounds like from what I saw, from what you were sharing on the trip, this was an incredible experience. I'll just throw it to you. What was it like being there in the wake of everything that's happened?
Well, it was very satisfying. I asked to go to Israel as soon as the war broke out because I just knew that the narrative that was going to be played out in most of the media was not going to be truthful. And really, it was going to be anti Israel. And we couldn't get the insurance stuff figured out. So my trip was pushed off. And I finally went. I arrived in Israel on Purim when it was just starting. So my first experience there was to attend a Purim celebration, which, as you know, if you read the book of Esther, that is about how the Israelis celebrate the saving of their people and the turning of the evil that was intended for their people to destroy their people onto the heads of those who actually wanted to destroy the Israeli people. So they celebrate this every year. And when I went, it was a gathering of mostly refugees in their own nation. We forget that roughly 200,000 Israelis right now who live near the border of Gaza and live in the northern area have been evacuated and forced to live in hotels, in cramped apartments, and so forth for months and months. Spouses with their young children living in one bedroom facilities. The kids can't go to school. Their future is unknown. And for the first time in months, these evacuees, these refugees of their own nation, were able to gather together and celebrate. And I saw firsthand the endurance of the Jewish people that even among this atrocity, even among this evil Hamas attack on October 7th, they were able to go forward with their lives. And it's amazing and inspirational. But I saw that day after day after day in Israel, the 15 days I stayed there, that the Jewish people are just enduring beyond belief. And it really is astonishing and motivational.
Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, gosh, what what struck you? Because I have not been, and I know that obviously life is getting back to normal there, but at the same time, it's a new normal. What was the thing that kind of struck you the most? Even emotionally, not just journalistically, but as a Christian going there with the eyes of a person in media. What struck you the most?
Well, briefly, two things: the lies and deceptions, and the September 11th makeshift memorial that was erected on Nova Festival Field, where Hamas first attacked. Right,
Mm.
I go there, I visit in person, and they have pole after pole after pole, hundreds of poles erected in the ground, upon which are mounted faces, photographs of those who were abducted, murdered, raped, injured, and so forth by Hamas. And it was a very September 11th like feeling to stand there as a Christian, as a believer, and just as a member of the human race, right? Looking at the faces of those decimated by such evil. And then the second thing that struck me is that the lies and deceptions that are being told about the Israeli people are just mounting on a day-to-day basis through the media. The idea of a two-state solution with people who want to eradicate you from the face of the earth, and you're supposed to sit down and have a logical discussion about peace with them. Impossible. And the
Mm.
lies and deceptions of ceasefire, let's cease fire, and Hamas, the poor Palestinian civilians need a chance to get aid and food, and the idea of Palestinian innocence is not exactly what's being put forth in the mainstream media. So those were the two things that were my big takeaways.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, man.
It's good.
You hear that, right? It's like, oh man, it gets you. You're gonna say something. Sorry about that, Jesse. Go ahead.
Well, Cheryl, let me ask this. I had the opportunity to witness the attacks, the unedited kind of what they've shown journalists before. So I watched that, I think, a couple months ago. And obviously, there are no words that you can put to it to describe the horror, just how barbaric it was. So you kind of alluded to it. I want to dig into it a little bit, very specifically that we're seeing obviously in our nation and the protests that go on. Somebody that is a Christian that is obviously American goes over there. In your case, see what goes on. What would you tell our nation if you had a big microphone right now and everybody's listening about people saying, we need a ceasefire, we need a ceasefire, this needs to happen. What would be your reaction to that, seeing what you've seen?
All right. So picture somebody coming into your home and raping and murdering your family members, and then being told the next week to sit down at a table with the rapists, and murderers and launch a discussion to form an agreement to live peacefully side by side with them.
Mm,
Because
mm,
that's basically what America, the West, the European Union, and the United Nations is telling Israel to do right now.
mm.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And
Wow.
don't you feel like, I mean, and you guys, we consume a lot of media, all of us, in addition to creating media. When you read about this, it feels so one-sided, right? At this point, there was this brief period of sympathy, and it very quickly shifted, as you were saying, Cheryl, into this narrative. And I think the part of this that you're getting to, and you've said here, but I think we need to reiterate this, the idea that the other side, like if Israel laid their arms down tomorrow, they would be obliterated, right? If Hamas laid their arms down, there would be peace. I keep hearing people say this, and it's so true, right?
Mm,
One side does not want Israel to exist. So how do you negotiate with that? And I think that's the struggle with covering this, that I feel like a lot of journalists are not fairly giving that perspective in their coverage. I mean, I feel like I'm on base here, right?
mm,
You are on base, and you can't negotiate, and there is no way to strike peaceful deals with people who just want to eradicate you. And I understand the argument that comes after. People make the case, yes, Hamas is savage, right? Let's kill Hamas, but the poor Palestinian innocent civilians, they need aid and assistance, right?
mm,
Well,
mhm,
that's a little bit of a spin on truth, because if you look at history, 80% of the Palestinians voted for Hamas in the first place. The ones who did not vote for Hamas voted for groups that had the same anti Israel, anti America, anti West agenda as Hamas. So it's one and the
mm,
same. And then you can say, well, maybe these Palestinian innocent civilians have learned their lesson. No, if you look at the polls that have just come out of that region, the majority of Palestinian so-called civilians support what Hamas did on October 7th, and
mhm,
still to this day cheer and support Hamas's ongoing war of resistance against Israel. And then third off, you go there, you speak to people in the know, you speak to people in the military, in law enforcement, and so forth. There are tunnels in Gaza, right, that go under every building there, including homes. So the idea that these civilians did not know what Hamas was doing is disingenuous at best. And also, along with the tunnels, in most of these homes are RPGs, rifles, and other tools of war put under children's beds. So it's not as if the Palestinian civilians are entirely innocent as the West would define innocence.
mm.
Well, and
Yeah.
I was going to throw out there this Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research back in December. They put this research out, and I don't know if you guys saw it at the time, but I just pulled the numbers up. This is, again, it's a few months old, obviously, but this was 2 months after the attack, and you actually saw in the West Bank support, for Hamas increased. I mean, it increased from 38% to 42%. You saw in the West Bank, it went from 12% to 44%. I'm sorry, it was Gaza that went 38 to 42%. So you saw Hamas support increase in those areas after, and really just shocking 72% of the respondents saying that the terror attack was a correct decision. But I would also add that a good chunk of these people had never seen the videos. And in fact, only 10% of them believed that Hamas committed war crimes. So there's an informational vortex going on in the midst of this too, it seems. But to your point, Cheryl, yeah, these stats are really, really shocking.
Yeah.
Stats and anecdotal discussions with people on the ground. And just to add one more quick note, briefly, the people who attended Nova Festival, they were young people, right? Most of them were of the progressive political way of thinking. They
mm,
thought that with the proper persuasion and opportunities, those in Gaza, the Palestinians, would lay down arms and have, an agenda and a design to live peacefully with the Israelis. So they actually did. They befriended some of these Palestinian people, and their eyes were awakened in a way that no human's eyes should be awakened, right? With such atrocity to the
mm.
realities of those who live in Gaza. They just want to kill Israelis.
Any final word on this, Jesse?
Uh, Again, just what I saw in the videos, I concur with what Cheryl is saying. I don't know all of where Palestine, kind of sits, but the videos that I was, able to watch were these were Hamas body cam footage video. And when they crossed back over, uh, from Israel, taking these hostages, so this is them taking their hostages, some, barely alive, they're parading them through the streets in Palestine. And the people who are not Hamas, you can obviously see, are cheering. So, that I'm sure those are just small areas of that, but it isn't like Cheryl was explaining. Uh, it isn't just Hamas, that is kind of rallying behind this.
Yeah. Well, and as we close it out, I mean, one of the things I have to often keep in mind as we are covering stories and looking at things, it's so easy to get caught in sort of the here and now and to look at just the material around us. But I often think as a Christian, pulling myself back to Ephesians 6 and the fact that, evil is real. And we are actually, I think this event was very clearly, and there are many other events like it, where you can just see the evil permeating every single part of what happened, and evil that is not just, human evil. It goes far beyond that. And so I often have to remind myself of that when I'm shocked and horrified in these stories, because it helps sort of reground me in the reality of what's going on around us, So, well, Cheryl,
Yep.
thank you for taking us through that. And I want to just, before we go, my story that I wanted to talk about, this one really moved me because Gary Sinise, obviously an actor, he's in Forrest Gump. He's been around the block for years, and has done a lot for veterans. I did not realize until he announced it in February that his son, Mac, was facing this cancer battle and had been since 2018. I also did not realize that Gary Sinise's wife, just I think 3 months before his son's diagnosis in 2018, was also diagnosed with cancer. And so their family had this really, I mean, here's a family, Gary, for those who don't know, the Gary Sinise Foundation, he supports veterans. He does, I mean, that's what his life's work is, right?
Hmm.
Because of the acting, he's been able to pour himself into this nonprofit, helping veterans in need with, physical and mental and all the needs that they have. And so his family went through this trying time, and he spoke out about it. And I actually have a friend who's an actor who knows him, who reached out to me and said, "Hey, I think you should talk to Gary." And I was like, well, I'd love to talk to Gary. I've tried for years and I've never been able to actually make it happen. So this friend, Stelio Savant, he connected us, and Gary was just really gracious with his time. And, we have this, I have it over on FaithWire and CBN, a fairly long 37-minute interview with him about all this. But really, I mean, Gary is Catholic, and his son had a very deep Catholic faith. And a lot of the interview was really how his son's faith helped guide him through. And the kind of cancer he had was chordoma. It was this persistent, rare cancer that starts in the spine and spread very quickly. And just there's so many elements to the story, but just the grace with which Gary handles himself in general, but really handled this. It's really worth, and we'll put the links to all of this in the comment section there and the show notes so people can go in and watch it. But really just powerful to see. And he fought alongside his, son the whole entire way. He was fighting with him every second of the way, every drug they could try, everything they could. And so there's just so many faith lessons in it. And I just wanted to share it. And I wanted to point people to it because it really left me, out of all the stories in the past 2 weeks, it left me thinking the deepest about the things that matter most in life, honestly.
Mm, mm, it's good.
And he was like 33 years old, right? He was a young guy too.
He was. Yeah,
Yep.
musician, just really talented guy, you know?
And
Yeah.
Billy, I just got to say, this is why I like your stuff, because your stuff always surpasses the petty politics, right? I think no matter what your politics, your agenda is in life, it's the faith that, makes you stop and think and makes you really reevaluate your life and your priorities. And you bringing a story like this forward, it's going to have an impact on a lot of people.
Mm,
You know, I
yep.
appreciate you saying that. I think sometimes selfishly, these are the stories for me that, of course we love to cover the politics. We love to do that when we need to. But this for me, when you get to sit down with somebody and hear what they've gone through, and we've all had things that we've gone through as human beings, it helps ground you, I think, and
Yeah.
remind you of what matters the most, right? And so I'm not a Catholic. I'm an evangelical. For me, hearing though how faith sustained them and how prayer, Gary was very candid. He said, "Look, I've collapsed on my staircase in tears, during this, trying to figure out how I'm going to move forward." And I
Mm,
picked myself back up, and others came and picked me up, just like I've been able to do for veterans. And now it's been done for me. And I thought, what a great message for all of us. A great reminder.
yeah. Well, and I think the encouragement too is the fact that and I've been able to cover some of Gary's stuff too. So it was so cool to be able to see that you were able to personally talk to him. But in situations like this, that celebrities and people of fame, sometimes when things like this happen, I'm sure we all question, but then we've seen a lot of people turn the other way and blame God. And I haven't quite seen that in Gary's, uh, testimony. So it's really encouraging that he there's just a trust there. There's an underlying trust that you see that you know God's got his reasons.
Yeah. And he, I think by speaking out too, he's honoring his son. And by the way, one of the
Yeah.
really cool things, his son created music before he died. And there's an album that's coming out. He was a musician, went to college for it, toured around the country before he fell ill. And this music is coming out, and it's going to benefit the Gary Sinise Foundation and veterans. That was one of his final things that he wanted to do, is finish that music. And then they're now going to release this, and you can go over to the Gary Sinise Foundation to find that. But I'd encourage people to read it, and just, we've got to remember the things that matter most, and pointing people, in my view, at the end of the day, I want to point people, to Jesus. And of course I want to talk about the things that matter, but in the, politically, but in the process, get
Yep.
people to what really matters. So I appreciate you guys hanging out with me this week. It was a lot of
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And nice to meet you, Jesse, as well.
Yeah. Likewise.
That's all for today's show. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode, and head over to the Washington Times and Higher Ground for more amazing stories. We will see you again next week.